At night, the sea looks like a blank page. Flat, black, and innocent. But that emptiness is a trick your nervous system wants to believe. The horizon hides low flyers, clutter hides small signatures, and the first real warning is often not a siren. It's a tiny change in the rhythm of the watch team. In the CIC, you hear it before you see it. A chair shifts, a keyboard pauses, someone inhales like they smelled smoke. Screens glow in faces that are trying to stay bored on purpose, because boredom is a shield against adrenaline. Then a single track appears, then a cluster, then an entire lane of contacts, and the map stops feeling like geography and starts feeling like a countdown you can't slow down. A swarm is not one threat. It's a pressure wave made of decisions, designed to steal seconds, overload attention, and make you spend your best answers on the wrong questions. The enemy's goal is rarely win a fair duel. It's force you to react. If you treat every blip like a bullet you must catch, you start firing early. If you fire early, you fire more. If you fire more, you run out of the only things you cannot magically refill in the middle of the ocean: time, attention, and hard kill inventory. That is why doctrine starts with a mindset shift. You're not trying to delete every drone from the sky. You're trying to make the attack fail. You win when the swarm loses coherence, loses confidence, loses timing, and arrives as scattered leftovers instead of a synchronized hammer. This is Battletech Declassified. Modern Warfare Explained is less than number. 0-hash is greater than. So before we even talk about weapons, we talk about control. Because the fleet that controls tempo controls survival. Most people picture swarm defense like a shooting gallery. Detect, lock, fire, repeat, and it sounds clean until you realize the swarm is built to break clean. A swarm turns your strengths into friction. Your sensors see too much. Your radios carry too much. Your combat system tracks too much. Your crew tries to process too much. The swarm is the opposite of a sniper. It's a crowd pushing toward a doorway, and its main weapon is your hesitation and your urge to be perfect. Doctrine accepts that perfection is impossible under saturation, so it builds a plan that remains functional when the picture is messy. That plan begins with a hard truth. Hard kill is the most expensive way to solve the cheapest problem. Missiles are precious. Even gun ammunition, when it's guided or specialized, is precious. And swarms often include decoys, scouts, and sacrificial drones, whose only job is to make you spend. If you treat every contact as lethal, you become the enemy's vending machine, converting your premium inventory into empty space. Doctrine flips the order of operations. Soft kill first, hard kill last. Soft kill is how you attack the swarm's brain, its link, its navigation, its seeker confidence, its ability to stay coordinated as one shape. Hard kill is reserved for the tracks that prove, through behavior, resilience, and geometry, that they can still strike after everything else tried to stop them. The point is not to be gentle. The point is to be smart about what you spend, and to make the swarm pay in time and coherence before you pay in missiles. Is less than #0. 5 is greater than. Soft kill sounds abstract until you think of it like a prank pulled on a marching band. A band looks powerful because it moves as one. If you disrupt the drummer's tempo, the whole band stumbles, not because each musician forgot how to walk, but because coordination is the real strength. A swarm is the same. It can be guided by data links, by GPS, by inertial navigation, by optical cues, by pre-planned waypoints, sometimes by combinations of all of them. Soft kill targets the glue, not the bodies. It jams, spoofs, dazzles, confuses, and forces the swarm to waste time reacquiring what it thinks is true. In a real fight, soft kill is also a probe. You apply disruption and watch what changes. Does the formation stretch? Do some drones climb, as if trying to regain link quality? Do they slow, as if the guidance loop is unstable? Do they split into smaller groups, as if a controller is failing? Behavior is intelligence. You may not know which drone carries a warhead, and you may not know which track is a decoy, but you can often see which tracks are stubborn, stable, and committed. Those are the ones Doctrine marks for later attention. Soft kill doesn't need to be perfect to be decisive. It only needs to break synchronization, because synchronized arrival is what saturates defenses. Once the wave becomes staggered, the swarm stops being a single huge problem and becomes many smaller ones, and smaller problems are what ships can solve. A common mistake is treating soft kill like one big magic button. Turn on the jammer and the swarm disappears. Doctrine assumes the enemy built the swarm to survive your first trick. Some drones may continue on inertial navigation remines. Some may use optical guidance near the terminal phase. Some may have hardened links. Some may have pre-programmed behavior when jammed. That's why soft kill in Doctrine is layered, not singular. You don't bet the ship on one tool. You stack tools so that failure in one layer still leaves you options in the next. Layering also means timing. If you blast maximum disruption at the first hint of contacts, you might reveal your posture and still fail to achieve anything meaningful. Doctrine prefers controlled disruption that forces reveals. It's like tapping a glass wall to see where it's weak before you try to break it. A small pulse of jamming in one lane may show which group depends on data link. A change in your own emissions may show whether the swarm is reacting to your radar mode. A decoy deployed early may show which seekers are hunting signatures versus which are flying blind to a waypoint. You are collecting clues while you still have range, and range is freedom. The tactical goal is not win the electronic fight. It's buy minutes. Minutes let your team sort lanes, assign sectors, and decide which contacts must be killed and which can be made irrelevant. Now we enter the part that decides everything but rarely makes headlines: geometry. If you fight a swarm everywhere at once, you fight it nowhere well. Doctrine draws invisible shapes into the battle space, pre-planned engagement zones. Think of them as rule boxes, not just distance rings. When a contact crosses a boundary, the plan changes automatically because swarms punish debate. If every track triggers a discussion, the swarm has already won time from your brain. Engagement zones are built around conditions. Range matters, but so does altitude, approach lane, track stability, and how the contact behaves under disruption. The outer zone is for classification and disruption. The middle zone is for shaping and thinning. The inner zone is for last resort hard kill, where you commit weapons only when criteria are met. That last phrase is important. Criteria. Not vibes, not fear. Criteria. It's the difference between a defense that spends because it panicked and a defense that spends because the math demanded it. When zones are real, the CIC feels different. People stop free-falling. They start executing. And execution is how you stay alive when the screen turns into a storm. Engagement zones also do something subtle. They protect human attention. A swarm tries to make every operator stare at everything. Doctrine forces the opposite. Each team owns a slice. One group manages the outer zone picture, lanes, clusters, and behavior under soft kill. Another group manages mid-zone shaping, decoy timing, escort coordination, and thinning priorities. The inner zone team focuses only on the few tracks that meet final gate criteria. This division of labor is not bureaucracy, it's oxygen. Without it, the room chokes. In practice, zones become a cadence. Outer zone calls changes in behavior, lane 2 drifting, cluster 3 splitting, altitude band rising. Mid-zone calls shaping effects. Decoy pull successful. Formation stretching. Thinning corridor forming. Inner zone calls only what matters. Criteria met. Committed track. Allocate intercept. When the language stays consistent, the room stays consistent. Consistency is the enemy of panic. And panic is what swarms are designed to harvest. So zones are not just where you shoot. They are how you keep your team thinking, and thinking is the first defensive layer. This is where soft kill first becomes more than a slogan. Soft kill is how you test the swarm before you commit expensive shots. If you shoot early, you might be shooting at decoys, unarmed scouts, or sacrificial drones whose only job is to trigger your inner ring too soon. The swarm's favorite trick is the bait wave, a first wave that looks scary enough to pull fire but cheap enough to lose. If you take the bait, the second wave arrives when your magazines are thinner and your crew is tired. Doctrine resists bait by forcing behavior to reveal intent. Tracks that survive disruption, keep their bearing, keep their speed, and keep pushing through shaping are more likely to matter than tracks that scatter, wobble, or lose coherence. This is not perfect, but it is better than fear-based spending. It turns the fight into a filter. Soft kill is the first filter. Shaping is the second. Thinning is the third. Hard kill is the final filter. Only what passes the filters gets the most expensive attention. The enemy wants you to shoot because you're nervous. Doctrine makes you shoot because the contact proved it deserved the shot. Now we add a major doctrinal pillar, escorts. A lone ship is a single point of failure in sensors, in decision load, and in inventory. A screen of escorts turns one ship into an ecosystem. More radars, more passive sensors, more jammers, more decoy launchers, more magazines, and most importantly, more angles. Swarms hate angles because angles create uncertainty. If the swarm cannot predict which platform will emit, which will jam, which will shoot, and which will bait, it must spread its own focus, and spreading focus weakens coordination. Escorts also enable distributed decision-making. If one ship is saturated, another can still classify. If one sector is jammed, another platform can provide an alternate track picture. If one magazine is depleted, another can cover the inner ring. This is redundancy, but it's also psychology. The CIC of the high-value unit feels less alone. The timeline feels less fragile. The room stays calmer, and calm is what keeps criteria-driven decisions intact. An escort screen is not about being heroic. It's about keeping the main ship's mind clear because the battle is won in the timeline before it's won in the intercept. Decoys are where doctrine becomes almost unfair, because decoys let you steer the enemy instead of only blocking it. A decoy is not just a flare. It's a false promise, an aim point that looks better than the ship for a seeker that is hungry for certainty. If you can persuade seekers to lock onto something else, you have done more than protect the hull. You preserved your hard kill inventory for the tracks that cannot be fooled. And in a swarm fight, preserving inventory is preserving life. Decoys also connect directly to engagement zones. You don't deploy them randomly. You deploy them on schedule, in lanes, to pull mass into corridors you already planned. A decoy can stretch a wave, bend its approach, break its timing, and force repeated reacquisition. Each reacquisition is a delay. Each delay is a chance for soft kill to bite, and for escorts to thin. This is why decoys are part of the choreography, not an emergency move. If decoys are used only when you feel desperate, they arrive too late. If they are used as shaping tools, they can break coherence early enough that the swarm never achieves peak saturation. In doctrine, a decoy is not a shield. It's a steering wheel. And the best steering happens before you reach the cliff. Distributed defense is the logical endgame of all these ideas. Don't stack your survival on one hull. Spread sensors and effectors so no single failure collapses the picture. In saturation, the picture is the battlefield. Lose the picture, and you start firing into fog. Fog is where swarms become lethal, because fog forces guesswork, and guesswork forces early spending. Distributed defense also makes seams harder to exploit. Every ship has gaps, horizon limits, clutter zones, and geometry constraints. A swarm will look for the seam, the quiet lane, the low-altitude approach, the timing offset that slips between attention. Overlapping coverage reduces seams, and it also lets the fleet shift dynamically. If one escort is saturated, another can slide. If one radar is degraded, another can carry track custody. If one sector is jammed, passive sensors elsewhere can still contribute. This is why doctrine loves redundancy. Redundancy is not waste. Redundancy is what keeps you alive when the enemy's whole strategy is to find the one thing you forgot to protect. So distributed defense is not only more firepower, it is a design choice that denies the enemy a single choke point and swarms live on choke points. At this point, the tactics start to sound like a machine, but doctrine is always anchored in one principle: Do not let the swarm set your tempo. A swarm wants you fast and sloppy. Doctrine wants you measured and lethal. That means triggers and thresholds must exist before contact. If this boundary is crossed, we shift posture. If this behavior appears, we treat the lane as committed. If these criteria are met, we allocate hard kill. Without triggers, every moment becomes a debate. And debate is time theft. Training turns triggers into reflex. Sector ownership prevents everyone from chasing the loudest blip. Cadence prevents the room from becoming an echo chamber of anxiety. In a swarm, your crew will feel the urge to finish, to confirm kills, to clean the screen. Doctrine resists that urge. It says continuous triage. The next dangerous lane matters more than the last destroyed track. Closure is a luxury. Survival is a process. If you can keep a disciplined tempo, you can wait longer. Waiting is not passivity. It is controlled patience, while soft kill, shaping, and escorts do work. Then when you finally fire, you fire with certainty. Now we bring hard kill back into the story, but only as the last gate. Hard kill is what you do when a track survives disruption, survives deception, survives shaping, and still remains committed on a lethal path. This is when missiles and guns become decisive because you have reduced chaos enough that the shot you take is meaningful. It is the difference between spraying water into a burning neighborhood and targeting the one house that is still on fire after the wind shifted. Hard kill in Doctrine is about timing. Too early and you waste inventory on bait. Too late and you compress your reaction window until you must fire more than you want. Engagement zones solve this by defining the moment hard kill becomes acceptable, not emotionally acceptable, mathematically acceptable. The criteria may include range, closure rate, track stability, resilience to soft kill, and approach geometry. When those markers align, you shoot. When they don't, you keep shaping. This is also why layered defense matters. Guns and point defense exist for leakers because Doctrine assumes leakers. You don't plan for a perfect day. You plan for a bad day that still ends without a hit. There is a dirty secret in swarm defense. Sometimes you cannot kill everything, and that is not defeat. It is reality. Doctrine plans around mission success, not perfect interception statistics. If the enemy's mission is to hit the ship, your mission is to deny that hit. A drone that splashes harmlessly after being spoofed. A drone that circles until fuel runs out. A drone that misses by meters because its seeker lost confidence. All of those are successful defenses, even if they don't look dramatic. This is why Doctrine is comfortable with probability. Each layer improves odds. Soft kill reduces coherence. Decoys reduce seeker confidence. Escorts widen the picture and share load. Zones reduce hesitation. Thinning reduces mass. Hard kill removes the stubborn survivors. No single layer must be perfect for the overall defense to work. This is the same logic as cybersecurity. You don't rely on one password. You layer authentication, monitoring, segmentation, deception, and response. A swarm is like a cyber attack made physical, an overload designed to break systems and people. Doctrine responds with layered resilience, not a single miracle. If someone sells you a one-button solution, be skeptical. Real Doctrine is humble. It assumes failure in parts and designs for success in the whole. Inside the CIC, Doctrine becomes human again. Someone has to keep the room calm enough to think. Someone has to call priorities without sounding uncertain. Someone has to protect the timeline when the screen turns into noise and the temptation to chase every track becomes overwhelming. That's why command and control is not an extra. It is the spine. A swarm attacks the spine by creating confusion, conflicting priorities, and a feeling that the situation is slipping. Doctrine fights back by giving the room structure that doesn't depend on inspiration. Clear roles, clear sector ownership, clear brevity, clear triggers, not because it sounds cool, but because it reduces cognitive friction. The simpler the language, the less time you spend translating and the more time you spend prioritizing. In a swarm, prioritization is the battle. A ship can have excellent weapons and still lose if it misallocates them under stress. That's why the watch team trains not only how to shoot, but how to decide. And decision-making is rehearsed like a drill. Because under pressure, you will do what you practiced, not what you wished. The real victory is a room that stays coherent. If the room stays coherent, the defense stays selective. If the defense stays selective, the swarm starts failing before it ever reaches peak saturation. So here is the core message. You beat swarms with choreography, not with panic. Disrupt first with soft kill to break the swarm's brain. Sort and classify by behavior, not by fear. Shape the approach with decoys, so mass stretches and timing breaks. Use escorts to widen angles, share decision load, and close seams. Thin selectively, removing the tracks that anchor coherence. Then commit hard kill late and ruthlessly against the contacts that prove they can still strike through every layer. In this documentary, we walk through this sequence as a living scenario, minute by minute, including the bait wave, the seam attempt, the false relief, and the second punch that arrives when the room starts to exhale. We'll stay grounded in publicly understood doctrinal principles, and we'll be honest where specifics are not openly detailed, because realism is part of trust, and trust is part of survival. If you remember nothing else, remember this. The swarm is trying to buy your mistakes with cheap mass, and doctrine is how you refuse the sale. Imagine the swarm commander, human or algorithm, is not asking, can we hit the ship? It's asking, can we force the ship to spend? That is the hidden goal that makes swarms so dangerous. They weaponize your rules of engagement, your caution, and your desire to be perfect. If a fleet reacts by firing early at every contact, the swarm wins even before a single drone gets close, because it has already converted your magazine into empty space. The moment you accept that, your mindset changes from shoot everything to shape everything. You stop treating every blip like a bullet you must catch, and you start treating the battle space like a chessboard you can rearrange. This is where pre-planned engagement zones become more than geometry. They become discipline. In the outer zone, the mission is not destruction. It is disruption and classification. You deliberately create conditions that expose what kind of swarm you are facing. You jam, you spoof, you change your own emissions posture, and you watch what the swarm does. Does it keep its formation? Does it scatter? Does it climb? Does it slow? Does it reroute? Does it split into subswarms? Behavior is intelligence. Then in the mid-zone, you transition from disruption to thinning. You do not fire at the first wave just because it is first. You fire at the wave that proves it can survive your soft kill and still maintain a lethal approach. The inner zone is the last gate, and the rule there is brutal. Only the tracks that remain dangerous after disruption and thinning get your hardest shots. That is how you stop a swarm from turning your ship into a vending machine. You deny it the ability to trade cheap mass for your expensive panic. Now let's zoom in on the moment most defenses break, the handoff between seeing and shooting. Sensors detect. Combat systems track. Humans classify. Weapons engage. And each step has its own tempo. A swarm attacks that tempo mismatch. It floods the front end with contacts, so tracking quality drops. It forces human operators to make rapid classification decisions, and it tries to create just enough uncertainty that you either delay too long or shoot too early. This is why doctrine emphasizes that your first victory is not in the missile, it is in the timeline. If your timeline stays clean, you can be selective. If your timeline collapses, you become reactive, and reactive is where you bleed inventory. A practical way doctrine keeps timelines clean is by building decision compression into the plan before the fight. That means triggers that are already agreed, thresholds that are already defined, and sector ownership that is already rehearsed. One team owns the outer ring classification, another owns the mid-ring thinning. Another owns the inner ring hard kill authorization under strict criteria. This is not bureaucracy. It is survival. In a swarm, the most precious resource is not missiles. It is cognitive bandwidth. Every time you remove a debate, you free the brain for the next decision. And when your brain is free, you can do the things swarms hate most. You can wait. Waiting does not mean doing nothing. It means holding fire, while soft kill and decoys do their job, while escorts widen the picture, while the swarm reveals its intent through behavior. Then when you finally do shoot, you shoot with certainty. And certainty is what stops a swarm from exploiting you. Let's talk about decoys, the way doctrine thinks about them, as a tool to sculpt the enemy's path. A lot of people hear decoy and picture a flare that saves you at the last second. In reality, decoys can be deployed early, and they can be used to steer a seeker toward a location you control. That matters because a swarm is not only a pile of drones, it is a set of guidance loops. Those loops are vulnerable to false confidence. If you can offer an aim point that looks better than the ship, you can pull mass away from the ship's true center line and force the swarm to stretch and deform. And when a swarm deforms, its timing breaks, and timing is the glue that makes mass lethal. This is where decoys connect directly to engagement zones. You can build zones that assume you will deploy decoys at specific ranges, so the swarm's most likely re-aim behavior carries it into a pre-planned thinning corridor. Inside that corridor, escorts can contribute, guns can engage, and soft kill can be tuned to exploit the most common seeker errors. The details of specific decoy systems are not always public, and that is fine. The doctrinal principle is public. You don't wait until the enemy is in the inner ring to start shaping the approach. You shape early, you shape consistently, and you shape in ways that reduce the number of clean shots the swarm gets. If the swarm has to keep reacquiring, recentering, regrouping, it is spending fuel and time, and it is getting closer to the moment where its own coordination fails. You are not just protecting the ship, you are pushing the swarm towards self-collapse. Escorts are not just extra guns, they are extra angles. A lone ship is like a single flashlight in a foggy forest. It can illuminate one direction well, but the shadows behind it stay deep. A screen of escorts turns that flashlight into a ring of light. Multiple radars, multiple passive sensors, multiple emitters, multiple jammers, multiple decoy launchers, and multiple magazines. All create a battle space where the swarm cannot easily predict where the strongest defense will come from. That uncertainty forces the swarm to behave conservatively, and conservative behavior is slower behavior. In doctrine, escorts also enable a concept that sounds simple but changes everything: distributed decision-making. If one ship is saturated, another can still classify. If one combat system is busy, another can take a sector. If one radar is degraded, another can maintain the picture. This redundancy is what stops the swarm from winning by a single choke point. And escorts can play roles that the high-value unit should avoid. An escort can emit more aggressively to draw attention. An escort can deploy decoys earlier. An escort can take riskier intercept geometry. This creates a layered defense that is not only layered in weapons, but layered in roles. The point is not to be heroic. The point is to keep the high-value unit's timeline clean. The cleaner the timeline, the more selective the hard kill, and the more selective the hard kill, the more a swarm begins to look like a failing plan instead of an unstoppable flood. Now, let's get concrete about the sequence, minute by minute, because doctrine is a recipe, not a philosophy. When the first wave appears at the edge of detection, you do not start with fire. You start with posture. Emissions, sensor modes, jamming readiness, decoy readiness, sector assignments, and engagement zone triggers are confirmed. The outer ring team begins classification and pattern recognition, not by trying to name every track perfectly, but by sorting clusters, lanes, altitude bands, speeds, and approach geometry. At this stage, soft kill is often used as a probe. You apply disruption and watch for behavioral tells. Does the swarm drift? Does it split? Does it maintain formation? Does it climb to regain link quality? Those tells are clues about guidance and control. As the swarm advances, the mid-ring plan activates. This is where thinning begins. But thinning is not random. You do not shoot at the densest cluster simply because it is dense. You shoot at the subset that is most likely to be lethal, the tracks that remain stable through disruption, the ones that maintain speed and bearing, the ones that behave like they are committed to impact. Meanwhile, decoys are deployed according to the zone plan, not as a panic move, but as a shaping move, pulling part of the mass off axis, stretching the timing, forcing reacquisition. Escorts contribute by widening sensor coverage. and by engaging sectors that would otherwise overload the main ship's fire control. Only when the inner ring criteria are met do you commit the heaviest hard kill. And when you do it with a mindset that feels almost cold. You are not trying to win the fight. You are trying to deny the one outcome that matters, a successful hit. Here's the trap swarm set inside that sequence, the bait wave. A bait wave is designed to look threatening enough to pull shots, but cheap enough that losing it is acceptable. Sometimes it is literally decoys. Sometimes it is drones that are unarmed. Sometimes it is just a forward screen that exists to trigger your inner ring too early. If you take the bait, you burn inventory before the real wave arrives. And now, the swarm's second wave does not need to be brilliant. It only needs to arrive when your magazines and your crew are tired. Doctrine is built to resist bait by using soft kill and behavior-based prioritization. A bait wave often behaves differently under disruption. It may scatter more easily. It may lose coherence. It may not push through jamming. It may not maintain a committed bearing. This is why Doctrine prefers rules over vibes. Your inner ring criteria should not be, "That looks scary." It should be a combination of range, speed, track stability, approach lane, and resilience to soft kill. When you tie hard kill to criteria, bait becomes harder to sell. And when bait fails, the swarm's whole business model weakens, because swarms rely on your early panic. In that sense, discipline is a weapon system. Discipline keeps the fight in the outer and mid-rings longer, where soft kill and shaping can do work. Discipline lets escorts share load. Discipline makes decoys more effective because you deploy them on schedule, not as a last gasp. And discipline makes your hard kill shots count, because by the time you fire, you have forced the swarm to show its true intent through its refusal to quit. Let's talk about engagement zones in a way you can visualize. Picture 3 invisible hoops around the ship, like the rings of a dartboard. The outer hoop is where you want to break the swarm's coherence. The middle hoop is where you want to thin and steer. The inner hoop is where you accept that anything still coming is either dangerous or at least stubborn enough to deserve expensive attention. The mistake is making those hoops purely distance-based. Doctrine treats zones as volumes and conditions, not just range. Altitude matters. Sea state matters. Sensor performance matters. Jamming effectiveness matters. Escort positions matter. That means zones are adaptive, but the adaptation is still planned. The plan includes the rules for how the zones shift when conditions shift. When zones are treated this way, they become a living framework. If jamming is working well, you can hold hard kill longer. If jamming is degraded, you may move the thinning gate outward. If decoys are drawing seekers effectively, you may accept more contacts in the mid-zone before firing. If an escort reports saturation in its sector, another escort can slide to cover. This is distributed defense as a choreography, not a static shield. And it has a psychological effect inside the CIC. People stop feeling like they are being chased by a storm and start feeling like they are executing a plan. That shift matters because swarms are designed to create panic. Panic creates waste. Waste creates vulnerability. Doctrine breaks that chain by giving your team a sense of control over the tempo, even when the number of tracks is absurd. There is another element Doctrine leans on that people rarely mention: silence. Not silence as in doing nothing, but silence as in emissions discipline. A swarm can be guided by external sensors, it can be cued by other platforms, and it can adapt based on what it detects. If you light up the sky with every emitter at maximum power, you may improve your picture, but you may also make yourself easier to classify, easier to aim at, and easier to time. Doctrine is about choosing when to be loud and when to be quiet, because every emission is both a sensor and a signature. This connects to soft kill in a subtle way. Sometimes the best disruption is not only jamming them, it is confusing them by changing yourself. If you can alter your emissions posture, shift modes, use passive sensors more, and coordinate with escorts so the fleet's picture stays strong, while the high-value unit stays less predictable, you make the swarm's targeting loop harder. What we know publicly is that modern navies invest heavily in electronic support measures and in tactics that reduce predictability. We do not always know the exact playbooks, but we do know the intent. Make your ship a moving puzzle, not a static lighthouse. The more uncertain your signature, the less confidence the swarm can have in its own guidance, and confidence is what turns mass into accuracy. Without confidence, mass becomes drift. Now we should address the hard question. What if the swarm is not dumb? What if it is resilient? Some swarms can be pre-programmed to continue even when links are jammed. Some can navigate inertially. Some can use optical cues. Some can be designed to ignore certain deception patterns. That does not invalidate doctrine. It simply changes which parts of the toolbox matter most. If you can't reliably break the link, you focus on breaking the seeker. If you can't reliably break the seeker, you focus on shaping geometry with decoys and escorts. If you can't reliably shape geometry, you focus on thinning earlier and on distributing the defense, so saturation in one sector does not collapse the whole fight. The key is that doctrine never bets on a single silver bullet. It assumes adaptation on both sides. That is why pre-planned zones include branches. If this happens, do that. If jamming is ineffective, shift to deception. If deception is ineffective, shift to early thinning. If early thinning is strained, shift to escort load sharing and to inner ring prioritization. This is also why training matters. The plan is only as good as the team's ability to execute it. When the screen turns into a storm. And the best teams do not memorize steps, they internalize principles, protect the timeline, shape the approach, force behavior reveals, spend hard kill late and selectively, and never let the swarm dictate tempo. Let's bring the human element back into the room, because doctrine lives or dies in the watch team. In a swarm event, the CIC can become an emotional amplifier. One anxious voice makes 3 anxious voices. One rushed call makes rushed decisions. The room starts to feel like it is sliding downhill. Doctrine counters that by giving the room a cadence. A cadence is not just a schedule. It's the rhythm of calls, updates, sector reports, and threshold confirmations. When cadence exists, people stop free-falling. They start stepping on stones across a river. This is why many doctrinal approaches emphasize clear brevity and consistent callouts. Not because it sounds cool, but because it reduces mental friction. The faster you can communicate what matters, the more brain you preserve for prioritization. In swarms, prioritization is the battle. You can have a perfect weapon system and still lose if you misallocate it. So the watch team is trained to say, outer ring behavior suggests link dependent. Mid-ring cluster stable through disruption. Inner ring criteria met for lane 3. And everyone knows what those phrases trigger. Because triggers were agreed before contact. The room becomes less like a debate club and more like a controlled instrument. And an instrument can play a complex song under pressure. Now let's explore the concept of thinning, without turning it into a simple body count. Thinning is not shoot a bunch. Thinning is remove the tracks that multiply your future risk. That often means shooting at the drones that are acting as coordinators, relays, or scouts. If you can infer which ones those are, in some swarm designs, certain drones may fly higher to maintain link quality. Others may stay slightly outside the main pack to provide targeting updates. Others may behave like shepherds, adjusting position to keep the mass coherent. These are not guaranteed patterns, but they are patterns a trained team looks for. If you can remove the brainy nodes, the rest of the swarm may degrade into less coherent behavior. Even when you cannot prove which drone is which, you can still use a heuristic approach. Focus fire on stable, resilient tracks that seem to anchor formation. Combined with soft kill, this can produce a cascading failure. The swarm starts to stretch, timing breaks. Some drones arrive early without support, some arrive late without synchronization. That is a win. Because synchronized arrival is what saturates a defense. When arrival is staggered, even a limited magazine becomes more effective. This is why doctrine is obsessed with breaking coherence. You are not only reducing numbers, you are converting one giant wave into many small problems. And small problems are the only kind your ship can solve reliably. Distributed defense also changes the math of thinning. If one ship must thin everything alone, it will either overspend early or be overwhelmed late. But if multiple ships can contribute, you can thin in layers. The outermost assets, including escorts and even other fleet elements, can begin disruption and selective thinning earlier. The mid-layer can continue thinning, while decoys shape geometry. The inner layer remains reserved for the tracks that prove they can penetrate. This is defense in depth, but not the old idea of stacking armor. It's stacking decisions and stacking options. What makes this powerful is that it allows the fleet to absorb surprise. Maybe the swarm is bigger than expected. Maybe weather reduces sensor performance. Maybe a sector is jammed. Maybe one platform suffers a system fault. Distributed defense means the fight is not decided by that single surprise. The fleet can rebalance. One escort can shift station. Another can take a sector. A third can act as decoy. Heavy platform while the high-value unit preserves inventory. Again, specifics vary by navy and by system, but the doctrinal truth is stable. Redundancy is survival. A swarm wants a single point of failure. Distributed defense makes failure local, not global. Let's address a misconception that can ruin everything: the idea that soft kill is not real combat. In a swarm fight, soft kill is often the most violent thing you do, because it attacks the enemy's ability to function. It can force drones to miss. It can force them to crash. It can force them to waste fuel. It can force them to reveal their guidance. But even when it does not cause visible destruction, it shapes the fight by altering probabilities. If you reduce the swarm's hit probability from high to low, you have changed the outcome, even if some drones remain in the air. Doctrine is comfortable with probabilistic success because it is grounded in reality. It assumes you cannot guarantee perfect defense, so it builds a sequence where each layer improves the odds. Soft kill reduces coordination. Decoys reduce aim point confidence. Escorts widen the picture. Engagement zones reduce hesitation. Thinning reduces mass. Hard kill removes the stubborn survivors. The combination is what matters. This is the same way modern cybersecurity works. You don't rely on one firewall. You layer detection, deception, segmentation, and response. A swarm is like a cyber attack made physical. It tries to overwhelm your systems. Doctrine responds like a mature security team, layered defenses that trade certainty for resilience, and resilience is what wins in saturation. Now we step into the inner ring decision, and this is where doctrine must be ruthless. In the inner ring, you do not have time for curiosity. You do not have time to admire how clever the enemy is. You have time for one thing: remove the tracks that can hit you. That means prioritization rules must be clear. Closest is not always highest threat. Fastest is not always highest threat. The highest threat is often the one with the cleanest path, the least disrupted behavior, and the most committed geometry. A disciplined inner ring decision also avoids the emotional trap of finishing. People want to finish enemies. They want to confirm kills. In swarms, that desire can be fatal because it pulls attention away from the next incoming lane. Doctrine emphasizes continuous triage. You do not chase stragglers if the main wave still exists. You do not spend scarce interceptors to make the screen look pretty. You spend them to deny the one outcome that ends the mission. This is hard for humans, because humans like closure. But doctrine is built to override that human instinct with procedure. Procedure keeps you alive. And if procedure feels cold, it's because it is designed to work when emotions are loud. So where does that leave us in this documentary about counter-swarm tactics? It leaves us with a doctrine that is less about hero weapons and more about choreography. Soft kill first to break the swarm's brain. Engagement zones to remove hesitation and control tempo. Decoys to bend geometry and steal confidence. Escorts to widen angles. Share load and add redundancy. Distributed defense to avoid single-point failure. Then hard kill, late, selective, and lethal against the tracks that prove they can survive everything else. In the next stretch, we'll turn these pillars into a single continuous scenario. A swarm appears. The fleet shifts posture. The outer ring probes with disruption. Decoys deploy on schedule. Escorts take sectors. Thinning begins with selectivity, and the inner ring fires only when criteria are met. And we'll keep doing the most important thing doctrine demands. We will keep asking, what is the swarm trying to make us do? Because once you see that, you stop being a target that reacts, and you become a defense that shapes. If you could replay every swarm event frame by frame, you'd notice something uncomfortable. The decisive moment is rarely a spectacular intercept. It's the first wrong assumption. The moment you assume every track is lethal. The moment you assume you must fire now to be safe. The moment you assume your sensors are giving you truth instead of a picture shaped by noise, clutter, and enemy intent. A swarm is a persuasion weapon. It persuades you to panic with math, and it persuades you to spend with uncertainty. Doctrine is the antidote, because doctrine is pre-decided restraint. It is the decision you make while calm, enforced when calm is impossible. So the next layer of counter-swarm tactics is not a gadget, it's a mindset you can audit. Are you spending hard kill because the track met criteria, or because the room got tense? Are you deploying decoys because the zone trigger fired, or because someone shouted? Are escorts contributing as planned, or are they improvising in ways that create gaps? This is why doctrine is full of rehearsals and checklists. Checklists are not a sign that people are weak, they are a sign that the environment is brutal. In medicine, pilots, and naval war, checklists exist because stress makes humans forget. The swarm is counting on that. Your doctrine exists to deny it. Let's build the scenario that stitches everything together, because tactics only become real when you can feel the timing. The outer ring begins with detection of a low-altitude cluster, multiple lanes, moderate speed, and a pattern that looks coordinated. The watch team goes to swarm posture, sector ownership confirmed, emissions adjusted, soft kill tools prepared, decoys staged, and escorts aligned to widen coverage. The first move is not fire, it is probing. Soft kill is applied in a controlled way, not maximum power everywhere, but deliberate disruption in the lanes that will reveal behavior. Within minutes, the swarm shows its first tells. Some tracks drift slightly. Some maintain bearing. Some split. That split is not random. It's information. The mid-ring plan begins shaping. Decoys deploy on schedule to pull the densest lane off axis, not to save the ship at the last second, but to stretch the wave and break synchronized arrival. Escorts engage in their assigned sectors, using their own soft kill and selective fire to thin the most resilient tracks. Meanwhile, the high-value unit holds expensive shots until inner ring criteria are met. The key is that every action is a response to criteria, not a response to fear. Fear is loud in the room. Criteria is quiet, and quiet is what keeps your hand steady. Now we enter the part of the scenario where most systems get stressed, the transition from many tracks far to fewer tracks close. The enemy will often try to exploit this by changing altitude, changing lanes, or injecting new contacts to reset your mental picture. In doctrine, this is expected. That's why you build a picture management routine. The outer ring team keeps updating clusters and lanes, not naming every drone, but maintaining the structure of the threat. The mid-ring team reports thinning effects and identifies which lanes remain stubborn through disruption. The inner ring team focuses only on the contacts that meet the final gate criteria. This division of labor is not optional. It's the difference between a room that gets overwhelmed and a room that stays functional. A swarm's greatest strength is forcing everyone to stare at everything. Doctrine fights back by forcing everyone to stare at their slice and trust the rest. That trust is built in training. In the scenario, you can feel it. One operator calls that a lane is degrading under jamming. Another reports, decoy pull is working. An escort reports it is saturated and shifting. And the command team adjusts the engagement zones according to pre-planned branches. The fight stays outside the inner ring longer than the enemy wanted, and that alone is a victory, because every minute you keep the fight outside is a minute you keep options alive. Then the enemy tries the next classic move, the knife through the seam. A small subset of tracks, sometimes lower, sometimes quieter, sometimes timed differently, tries to slip through the coverage gaps created by the chaos of the main wave. This is why distributed defense and escorts matter so much. A single ship will always have seams, sensor horizon, clutter, geometry, and system limitations. But a screen can close seams by overlapping fields of view and by shifting positions. In doctrine, seam protection is deliberate. You assign someone to look for the quiet lane. You create triggers that fire when a lane deviates from expected behavior. You treat unexpected quiet as suspicious, not comforting. In the scenario, the seam attempt triggers a planned response. An escort shifts station to close the gap. Soft kill is focused on the seam lane to force behavior reveals. A decoy is deployed to draw seekers away from the high-value unit's centerline. The inner ring team prepares, but it does not fire until the criteria are met. This is where doctrine can feel counterintuitive. Your instincts scream to shoot the seam immediately. Doctrine asks you to confirm, to probe, to force the contact to show intent, because a seam lane is also a perfect place for decoys and bait. The enemy wants you to dump your best shots into a lane that might not matter, while the real danger remains in another lane. Discipline keeps you from taking that deal. Now the scenario reaches the moment of truth, the inner ring gate. A handful of tracks remain stable, committed, and resilient through disruption. They have survived shaping. They have survived thinning. They have maintained geometry that suggests they can reach and strike. This is the point where hard kill becomes appropriate. Hard kill is not a trophy. Hard kill is a scalpel. You take the tracks that still carry high probability of mission kill and you remove them. Here, engagement zones pay off because the decision is already made. The inner ring criteria are met, so the system and the team do what they train to do. Interceptors are allocated with prioritization, not by closeness alone, but by lethality markers. Guns and point defense are readied for leakers. Escorts cover their assigned sectors and continue thinning any remnants that try to regroup. Decoys remain active to pull any seeker that might survive. The fight is loud now, but it's loud inside a structure. The difference between chaos and controlled violence is structure, and structure is what doctrine gives you. After the hardest moment, there is a second danger, the false relief. The picture looks cleaner. The number of tracks drops. People breathe. That is when the swarm, or a second wave, can be most lethal, because your vigilance relaxes while your magazines are lower and your crew is fatigued. Doctrine anticipates that too. It treats swarm defense as a campaign, not an event. You maintain posture until the threat window closes. You assess inventory. You rotate roles to avoid cognitive collapse. You verify system performance and sensor integrity. And you keep searching for the seam because that is the enemy's favorite place to hide. This is where the phrase soft kill first, hard kill last becomes a long fight principle, not a short fight rule. You conserve hard kill so you still have it when you truly need it. You keep using soft kill to disrupt any residual coordination. You use escorts to expand the detection and engagement envelope, because fatigue is not only human, it is also mechanical. Systems heat, networks saturate, and the timeline becomes fragile. A disciplined fleet treats the post-engagement phase as part of the engagement. That's how you survive the second punch after you just blocked the first. Let's pull back and be honest about uncertainty, because realism is part of trust. We do not always know which exact electronic warfare techniques are used in specific incidents. We do not always know what decoy profiles are employed or what sensor modes are selected in classified scenarios, and we often only learn lessons years later through fragments, interviews, and doctrine updates. That does not mean we know nothing. It means we must separate principles from secrets. Principles are visible in how fleets train, how systems are designed, and how doctrine is written in public terms. Secrets live in the specific waveforms, algorithms, and classified procedures. So when you hear someone claim they have a single perfect solution, a miracle jammer, a wonder missile, a one-button defense, be skeptical. Doctrine's entire tone is the opposite. It says, assume the enemy adapts. Assume your sensors degrade. Assume your crew is human. Assume there will be leakers. Then build a layered response that remains functional even when pieces fail. That is the real meaning of counter-swarm tactics. Not perfection, resilience. And resilience comes from layering soft kill, shaping, zones, escorts, decoys, distributed coverage, and selective hard kill into one choreography that can take a hit and still keep moving. Now we translate that into the simplest mental model you can hold under stress, the 3 questions. First, what is the swarm trying to make me do right now? Second, what tool denies that goal with the least cost? Third, how do I keep the fight outside the ring where my options collapse? If you can keep those 3 questions alive, you can navigate chaos without being dragged into it. In practice, the first question stops you from taking bait. The second question keeps you from overspending hard kill when soft kill or decoys could do the job. The third question forces you to think in zones and geometry, not in emotional proximity. This is why doctrine feels almost like martial arts. A skilled fighter does not meet force with force. A skilled fighter uses timing, positioning, and redirection to make the opponent waste energy, then strikes when the opening is real. A swarm is trying to make you swing wildly until you tire. Doctrine makes you conserve energy, control range, and strike only when needed. That's not philosophy. That is survival math. There is one more doctrinal pillar that matters in swarms: logistics thinking. Your magazine is not just what you carry. It is what you can reload, what you can sustain, and what you can afford to spend over a campaign. A swarm attack today might not be the last swarm attack this week. That's why fleets invest in cheaper intercept options, in guns, in directed energy research, in improved decoys, and in better soft kill, because sustainability is the real battlefield. If you can defeat 10 attacks instead of 1, you have strategic advantage, even if each individual defense is not perfect. So Doctrine's obsession with soft kill is also an obsession with sustainability. Every time you make a drone miss instead of shooting it down, you preserved inventory for later. Every time you steer the swarm into a corridor where escorts can share the load, you distributed wear and tear. Every time you resist bait and hold expensive shots until the inner ring criteria are met, you turn the enemy's cheap mass into wasted effort. That is what winning looks like in modern warfare. Not always dramatic destruction, but making the enemy spend more effort for less effect until their own system collapses. Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. Now, let's tie everything back to the title promise of this documentary, Counter-Swarm Tactics, how you actually solve it in real doctrine. You solve it by refusing the false choice between shoot everything and do nothing. Doctrine gives you a third option. Shape the battle space so the swarm's mass becomes less lethal before you ever start spending your hardest shots. Soft kill first to disrupt coordination and force behavior reveals. Pre-planned engagement zones to control tempo and remove hesitation. Escorts to widen angles and share decision load. Decoys to bend geometry and steal seeker confidence. Distributed defense to deny a single point of failure. Hard kill last, selective, and late against the tracks that prove they can still punch through. That sequence is what turns a swarm from a flood into a set of smaller, solvable problems. And once the problems are smaller, you can solve them with far fewer expensive shots. That is the hidden victory. The victory you feel not in explosions, but in the quiet of a CIC that never fully lost control. Let's finish by returning to the CIC, because that's where doctrine becomes real. The screen is still busy, but it's not a blizzard anymore. It's a pattern. Calls are short and clear. Zones are being managed like traffic lanes, not like surprises. Decoys are being deployed on schedule. Escorts are reporting sectors and closing seams. Soft kill is pulsing and shaping. Hard kill is firing only when the criteria demand it, and the crew is doing the thing swarms are designed to prevent. They are thinking is less than #0. 2# is greater than. This is the core lesson of S2E6. The swarm is not only an engineering problem, It's a decision problem. It's a psychology problem. It's a tempo problem. And Doctrine solves it by building a plan that protects your decision-making when the enemy tries to steal it. If you remember one sentence, remember this: you don't beat a swarm by being louder. You beat it by being smarter about when to be loud. So the next time you see a headline that says, "Drones make ships obsolete," pause. What drones really do is expose bad habits. They punish early panic. They punish single-point defense. They punish slow classification and sloppy prioritization. And they reward the side that can layer disruption, deception, geometry, and selective force into one coherent response. We don't have to pretend this is easy. In real life, weather degrades sensors. Jamming is contested. Links are unreliable. False tracks appear. Humans get tired. And the enemy adapts. But that's exactly why Doctrine exists. It is the set of decisions you make in advance, so you don't make the worst ones under pressure. And that is why soft kill first, hard kill last is not just a slogan. It's a survival principle built for an age where the cheapest weapon can still overwhelm the most expensive platform if you let it. If you want a clean mental checklist to take away from this episode, here it is. First, protect the timeline, assign sectors, build triggers, and keep cadence. Second, probe with soft kill and watch behavior, because behavior reveals guidance. Third, shape the approach with decoys and geometry, and don't wait until the last ring to start steering. Fourth, use escorts to widen angles and close seams, because redundancy is survival. Fifth, thin selectively. Remove the tracks that anchor coherence, not just the ones that are loudest. Sixth, commit hard kill late, only when inner ring criteria are met, because inventory is life. That checklist is Doctrine in miniature. It's not magical, it's not perfect, but it's how real fleets try to keep their ships alive against a threat that exists to create chaos. And if you notice, every step is designed to deny the swarm its favorite outcome, your panic. At the end of a swarm defense, the ocean looks the same as it did at the beginning, black and empty. But the crew does not feel the same. The crew feels the cost in heat, in fatigue, in spent inventory, in the ringing quiet after the noise. This is why swarm warfare is changing Doctrine, because it forces navies to think like systems engineers and like psychologists at the same time. It's not enough to have a better missile. You need a better plan for when to use it, and a better plan for how to avoid needing it. And this is where the story becomes bigger than one ship. Counter-swarm tactics are not only tactics, they are the foundation of deterrence. If an adversary believes a swarm will simply drain your defenses and guarantee a hit, they will be tempted to use it. If they believe your doctrine will make their swarm fail, waste fuel, waste coordination, and waste time until the attack collapses, the swarm becomes less attractive. The best defense is the defense that makes the enemy's plan feel like a bad investment. So, if you're looking for the real fix, the one that actually scales, it is this. Don't treat swarms as a shooting problem. Treat them as a control problem. Control the tempo with pre-planned engagement zones. Control the enemy's confidence with soft kill and deception. Control the geometry with decoys. Control saturation by distributing defense across escorts and overlapping sensors. Control spending by reserving hard kill for the tracks that prove they can still strike. And when the ocean goes quiet again, remember what you really did. You didn't just shoot down drones. You denied the swarm its only true weapon, the ability to make you waste your own power.